one of the most important things I've learned, and it took me a while, this was one of my wife's most important teachings, was not only is it okay to have a good time doing spiritual practice, you actually do much more effective practice if you have a good time. Enlightenment is about lightening up. So it's not about doom and gloom. And so one of the great tragedies and misunderstandings of so much spiritual practice is the mistaken idea that spiritual practice is sacrifice. It's not sacrifice. Service, which is the culmination of spiritual practice, if done skillfully, is done as enlightened self-interest, not as sacrifice. If it's done as sacrifice, if I'm doing this and sacrificing myself for you, watch out. Sacrifice breeds resentment. But if it's done out of the recognition that my contributing to you makes me feel good, then that is enlightened self-interest and a win-win for everyone. So anytime you're practicing and it feels like sacrifice, step back for a moment and check into your beliefs about it and the motivation, and just check in and see if the motives and beliefs are skillful or not. Okay, so first 3 steps in Karma Yoga: stopping, coming into the present, choosing an intention. 4th, here's where it gets a little more challenging. Attempt to live out your intention as impeccably as possible. The idea of the warrior is one of the archetypes that's common across many spiritual traditions. The warrior being the person who absolutely goes for it. The warrior uses will and determination to do their practice as fully and impeccably as possible and to confront any difficulties and barriers that may arise. And it's a very wonderful quality and archetype to live out. It has to be done with great sensitivity, otherwise it's easy to fall into tension and contraction and force. So the warrior side of impeccability needs to be balanced with sensitivity and gentleness. But as with so much of spiritual practice, the magic word is balance, and we want to cultivate all helpful qualities. And the warrior quality of effort, determination, impeccability is really valuable. That's what helps you cut through the barriers, the resistances, the fears, the phobias, the defenses that all of us have and that come up as we do spiritual practice. Robert de Ropp, who wrote the book The Master Game, said, "Seek above all for a game worth playing. Play as if your life and sanity depend on it, because they do." Now, there are a lot of benefits that come from attempting to live and practice impeccably. When you first hear it, it sounds kind of, ooh. It sounds like it's going to be tough and struggle and painful. And it can be. But actually, it turns out there are a lot of rewards. First off, there's a curious paradox. Recall the times you've really gone for something? Have you noticed it's easier to go 100% for something than 99%? As long as there's a little bit of holding back and fearful and contraction and withhold, the mind feeds on that fear and contraction. But if you just decide, I'm going for it, there's no reinforcement of the fears and barriers and defenses and blocks. And you just cut through. So there's something freeing and paradoxically easier about really going for it, being impeccable, than sort of being impeccable. So that's the first benefit. Second benefit is when one really goes one's practice, when one attempts to be impeccable, and all we can do is attempt, then it reinforces, strengthens, conditions corresponding helpful states of mind and mental qualities. It reinforces resolution and courage and qualities such as compassion, which got you to act in this way in the first place. Second thing it does is a paradox, and it's a paradox that a lot of people fall into a trap here. As soon as you commit to a spiritual practice, and particularly if you commit to doing it impeccably, what are likely to come up are all the blocks and barriers in the way. That is, you may find yourself suddenly feeling anxious or worried or getting depressed about whether you can do this, or worrying about how you'll look, all these things that come up. And that at that stage, the trap is to think, to get lost into it and buy into the fear, oh, I'm fearful, I'm scared, oh, this is too much, blah, blah, blah. Instead of realizing these blocks and barriers and having them come up are exactly what you need in order to work through them. The goal of spiritual practice is not only to make you feel good, it's to bring into awareness all the blocks and barriers and fears and phobias, etc., so you can process them. Because as long as they remain unconscious, they stick around. But what is brought into awareness is healed. One could say that the central assumption underlying so many spiritual practices and psychotherapies is that awareness is healing. And whether it's in psychotherapy where Fritz Perls, the founder of Gestalt therapy, said awareness in and of itself is curative, or it's in awareness meditations where you cultivate, for example, the Buddhist mindfulness or the Taoist internal observation, the assumption is that what is any block or barrier or fear that is brought into awareness tends to be healed. Barriers, blocks, negative mind states only perpetuate and remain while they are unconscious, or when they come into awareness and are resisted. That is when they're not accepted. We'll talk about that a little more. So, the trap people get into when they commit to a practice, and particularly impeccability, is the negative stuff comes up and then they judge themselves for having it. I think the big trap is thinking, oh, there's something wrong with my practice. Instead of recognizing this is the practice, and this is what the practice is designed to do, to bring this stuff up so we can process it. So the beauty then is that the commitment to impeccability accelerates this process. It brings stuff up more, and therefore allows us to recognize it, to experience it, to explore it, and to extinguish it, and to learn from it. So what you want is to bring this stuff up, bring anything that's in the way of your awakening up into awareness. And impeccability, a commitment to impeccability is a great way of doing that.